السلام علیکم بینندگان عزیز، امیدوارم که در هر نقطه دنیا باشین خوش و آرام باشین. خوش آمدین در هفته در برنامه ما. امروز راجع به دیوی یا domestic violence صحبت میکنیم. امروز میمان ما اورینسا جان آمده. و خیر خوش آمدین اورینسا جان.
تشکر بسیار زیاد فرشته جان، بسیار خوش هستم که بازگردان اینجا آمدیم که گپ بزنیم.
تشکر بسیار زیاد. ما بسیار خوش هستیم که شما ارما وقت خود بر ما میدین. تشکر یک جهان سپاس. دی ماه اکتبر که هستد به نام DV Awareness Month است یا Domestic Violence Awareness و ما میخواستیم که دهی رفته راجع به زی موضوعات صحبت کنیم. Good afternoon and welcome to the Sadai Hack Television programming. Today we have Hurunnessa here with us. She's our monthly guest that gives us her time very graciously. We're honored to have her. We will be discussing domestic violence this week. It is DV Awareness Month. So we will go into a bit of an informal discussion on some of the forms and some case studies with regards to this topic. And so I wanted to start with the big question at hand, which is, what is domestic violence? What is DV? When somebody says to you that this person is a survivor of DV, not everybody understands what that means. So domestic violence can be broken up into different forms. The first form, the one that people are probably most familiar with, is physical abuse. The second form would be mental abuse, emotional abuse, financial abuse, sexual abuse, and the newest and the latest form would be cyber abuse. Okay, so domestic violence یک کانسپت است که در مملکت مخصوصا در امریکا بسیار یک جرم کلان است و چند رقم domestic violence است. معذرت میخوایم از خاطر که دقیقاً امی لغت دری یا در فارسی چون یک چیز نیست، یک موضوع نیست که در افغانستان راجع بهش مثلا تحصیل شده یا یک چیز بسیار نرمال نیست. ما امروز در برنامه ما ایره دیوی میگیم با اجازه شما. اولین رقمی که میتونه یک آدم ابیوز شوه جسمی است. جسمی است، روحی میباشه از مثلا خدا ناخواسته کس تجاوز شوه، مثلا یک کسی از روی اینترنت میتونه که ابیوز شوه. مخصوصا آل در 2020 بسیار زیاد میبینیم که یک ابیوز بیخی نو برآمده بین خانما و شوهرها یا دیگر رقم مناسبات هایی که در امریکا وجود داره زیاد شده. So, in the same terms of, or when we talk, I should say rather, about these different forms of abuse, there are two very important things to keep in mind before we get into the detailed description of what these forms are. The first thing that I want to talk about is that both men and women can be abused. And I know that a lot of people, don't necessarily see the other side of it. But as a person that is doing intervention work and that works with DV survivors, whether it's from a mental health perspective or whether it's a moral support or for advocacy, there is a percentage of males who are also abused. Studies have shown that emotional abuse is the number one abuse that they face. این موضوع که هست نه تنها وجود داره برای خانما، یک فیصد کم است که مردای ما شما این ابیوس دیدن و زیادتر وقت یک خانم که به شوهر خود این ابیوس میکنه یک چیز روانی میباشه و روانی میباشه و از نگاه سایکولوژی مرد کم میاره یا اعتماد به نفسش پایان میاره. این یک فرم ابیوس است. وهمچنان one of the really interesting parts in or one commonality between all these forms of abuse is isolation. Isolation meaning that the person, whether it be male or female, that is using any of these forms to abuse an individual uses this with the tactic of isolating or separating a person from their community, from their loved ones. So that's one way that people can um, kind of use this tactic to plug in this abuse. در فارسی هم بسیار کوتاهش هم میگم که مرد باشه یا زن باشه که این رقم ابیوس پیش میبره یک یگانه تکنیک که در هر رقم ابیوس استفاده میکنه جدا کردن است. زیادتر اتر انسانی که یک خانم یا شوهر ابیوز میکنه کوشش میکنه که انسان جدا کنه، چی از خانم، چی از فامیلش باشه، چی از خورخوندایش باشه، چی از رفیقایش باشه، چی از مسجدش باشه، از کمیونیتیش باشه، اون نفر بیخی جدا میکنه و کوشش میکنه که اون نفر رابطه نداشته باشه امرای کسی و تنها خود احساس کنه. And the last thing before we move on that I wanted to discuss with regards to that is the concept of gaslighting. Gaslighting is another psychological manipulation tactic. So when somebody gaslights somebody, essentially what they're doing is they start to plant these seeds in somebody's mind psychologically that makes them feel like they're crazy or makes them feel like something that they're doing is wrong. As نگاه روانی و سایکولوژی یک تکنیک دیگه است که وقتی که یک خانم یا یک شوهر ابیوز میکنه یکی دیگه خدا ایره به نام گسلایتینگ میگیم. وقتی که یک انسان گسلایت میکنه یک انسان دیگه او را اتو چیزا برش میگه و اتو چیزا هر روز در گوشش میگه تا که باور کنه که آب خدا شاید ما باشم، شاید ما کدام تکلیف داشته باشم، شاید ما خدای ناخواسته دیوانه باشم یا شاید ما غلط باشم و او انسان درست است ارگپه که او میزنه و آستاستا و نفر احساس میکنه که راستی البته من کدام تکلیف دارم. این دو تا تکنیک همیشه استفاده میشه در وقتی که دیوی منشن میشه. Hurunnessa John, I would love to hear your input with regards to what I've shared right now, and if there's any particular form of abuse that you wanted to touch on, we would be happy to hear it.
Thank you so much, Sir John. Again, this is such a tricky topic but much needed within our community because we see that it's something that we haven't really touched upon and we haven't really dug deep into the causes of it and the importance of how do we deal with it in order to make sure that the family structure and everyone living within a family is protected and not violated. I want to focus more on the emotional, psychological abuse, only because physical abuse, majority of the victims are women. And there are some men who are victims of physical abuse as well. And the reason I want to touch upon the emotional and psychological abuse is because that happens more with female and the males in the relationship, but it also happens to children and people who live under the same household. So I'm looking at it more from the holistic family approach in terms of what emotional and psychological abuse does to people and why it's wrong. So if I'm talking about myself, and I've been extremely very open about my life from all different angles, and I bring this up because emotional and psychological abuse has a different type of, psychological effect on a person that, sometimes even transforms into a physical pain and physical and emotional pain as well. You might end up having some kind of, physical ailment because of that as well, because you're stressing so much over the emotional abuse that you're receiving from the other end. And that in self manifests in so many different other problems within your life. And so when I was married for 15 and a half years, I wasn't physically abused, alhamdulillah, like that wasn't an issue, but my ex, because of his own issues that he hadn't dealt with, was emotionally and psychologically abusive. And, it was more about putting me down, making me feel I wasn't worthy, or everything I was doing was wrong. Nothing lived up to his expectations. Everything was a problem. And that was a control issue, right? To control someone, you put them down. But what ended up happening was because I was a stay-at-home mom at that point, and I put my career on hold because I was raising 4 kids, and they were young at that time. I didn't really have the mindset to say, well, no, I'm not what he's saying. Although I knew I wasn't like that, and I knew I wasn't all the things that he was saying that I knew that I had to pull myself out of it all the time. Like, I had to talk myself out of, like, no, you're smart, you're this, you're that, and constantly always reassuring myself, because that type of interaction can really break you long term. Like, physical abuse, you can see it. Emotional abuse is hidden, no one sees it. It's between you and yourself, and you having to get over that trauma of what you're actually going through. So it was a constant battle for me every day, trying to get myself out of that. And psychological and emotional abuse happens with to men as well. Sometimes women, what they end up doing is emasculating the man, telling him he's worthless, he's not making enough money, he's ugly, he's not enough, he's not like the other girl's husband. There's comparison. All these things are a form of abuse. When we're connecting things with our male counterparts, and vice versa for women also. But I'm giving you a kind of a surface level type of interaction between how a man can be a victim of domestic violence through emotional and psychological abuse. And it just brings the person down. You feel worthless. You don't feel that you've lived up to the person's expectation. And again, nothing you do is ever enough. And then with children, it's if it's the parents who are emotionally and psychologically abusing the kids, it would look like, what's wrong with you, why are you so weird, that's so stupid, why can't you be like your sister or your brother. So these things happen in a family setting, and sometimes it could happen between all the people in the household. So I picked this specifically because it touches on so many different relationships in the family. من میخواستم که از باره emotional abuse گپ بزنم، چون که یگانه چیز است که ما بین خانم و شوهر و کل فامیل یگام خودم دیده میتونه یکی باشه که اولادای خود یگان تا مادر پدرها که اولادای خود abusive می باشن، verbally abusive, emotionally abusive، گپای خراب در اولادای خود میگن تو لود هستی، هوشیار نیستی، مقبول نیستی، چاق هستی، ایره نخو، ایره نکو، بسیار غلط میکنی. غیر گپای خراب بر اولادای خود میزنن مادر پدرها. ای emotionally abusive است بر اولاد، و long term ما ببینیم چند سال بعد ای یک افکت بسیار خراب می باشه سر از اولاد. او باز self confidence نمی داشته باشه، نمیخواد که چیز بکنه، depression سرش میایه. ای کلش امی رابطه مادر پدر که اولاد بسیار مهم است که ما باید لغتای خوب بزنیم، کچان روی خوب کنیم، کچان بیرون بریم، می رابطه ما را کچان باید خوب داشته باشیم. که اگر ما ابیوسیو باشیم، گپای غلط بزنیم، سر از ما اولاد بسیار تاثیر خراب میکنه. و اگر ما بین یک زن شوهر ببینیم، اردوشان امی verbally, emotional, psychological abuse که دیگه خود کده میتونن. یک زن شوهر خود گفته میتونه که تو پیسه زیاد نمیسازی، تو بیکار هستی، لود هستی، چاق هستی، قوار هستی، هیچ خوشم نمیایی، این کار سعی نمیکنی، اوست کار سعی نمیکنی، شوهر بسم دانی را سعی کو، چقدر خوب مرده کسی تو میکنه و تو میکنه، که یک کس دیگه او را کمپیر میکنن، باز امو مرد خودش امو احساس خود کم فکر میکنه و امو فکرشان در امو کار که باید بکنن که مرد میکنه در فامیل، که پیسه میاره، خانه را برشان میخره، کرا را میته، مورگیج میته، نان میخره، اونم کل چیزا سرش باز تاثیر میکنه. چون که امو زن در مو وقت که در شوهر یک جای نیست، او را کم میاره، بازی بسیار یک تاثیر خراب میکنه سر از اون مرد. و برای زن اگر مرد غیر بگه که نانت خراب است، نان پخته کردن یاد نداری، یا کالا شستن یاد نداری، ایره یاد نداری، ایره نمیکنی، قوار هستی، چاق هستی، لاغر هستی، قدت پخش است، قدت دراز است، هرچی که بویی که همون نفر احساس خود کم فکر کنه، ای emotional psychological abuse است. اونمو بازمو زن فکر میکنه که من صحیح نیستم، من برای زیادم بس نیستم، خود سلف داوت میکنه و ای تاثیرش بسیار خراب است سر از آدم از طرف درون. بازی خودش از چرا که از طرف درون آدم غیر نارام است، خودش در وجود آدم تاثیر میکنه. یگان تا دپرشن میگیره، یگان تا خودشان درد جان پیدا میکنه، از این چیزا سردردی یافت میکنه، کل چیز باز امو استرس از درون در بیرون خود نشان میده. من کارسی کرده، وقتی کارسی کردگی بودم، شوهر مرا هیچ وقت لغو نمیکرد مگر emotional psychological abuse بسیار زیاد بود. غیر مرا میگفت که ایره صحیح نمیکنی، اوره صحیح نمیکنی، دمی هر چیز مرا کم میگفتن. باز من خود باید هر وقت از امو فکر، از امو حالت باید میکشیدم هر روز و بسیار یک کار سخت است، خصوصا اگر در درون خانه اولاد داشته باشین، کار دیگه هم داشته باشین، هر وقت یک کس یک چیز بگه برتون با شما خودتان بگه که نه من تو نیستم. باز این سر خودم بسیار یک تاثیر خراب کرد برای بسیار وقت، مگر الحمدلله من خودم میفهمیدم که من چی هستم. با وجود از اونم یگانه چیز نیست که یک آدم باید در رابطه زن و شوهر باید احساس کنه.
Thank you so much for, again, your courage. It takes somebody with a lot of courage and somebody very brave to be able to empower others through their own personal story and through their own personal struggles. So I personally really appreciate that. Thank you so much. بسیار یک کار سخت است که آدم حقیقت زندگی شخصی خود مخصوصا در تلویزیون، در میدیا برای کلگی قصه کنه و جای افتخار است که شما برآمدین از این سیچویشن و خانم ها و دیگر میتونین که تشویق کنین و یک امید برشان بدین. Again, we are so appreciative of your courage because by sharing your story, you are empowering and giving hope to somebody out there is watching this and is going to say, you know what, if Hurunnessa John was able to do it and she's so successful, mashallah, then so can I. And I think that that's really the intention behind why we're doing this and the intention behind why it's so incredibly important to discuss this topic. I know that this topic is so taboo for Afghans. And I don't want to ever generalize and say all Afghans, but let's be real. Let's not brush this under the rug. There are in our community many women and men who are suffering. I personally had a male client from our community, from our culture, who I spoke to probably over a year, provided intervention services for him. And he had a wife that was constantly putting him down, constantly making him feel less worthy and less than. And there came to a point where he wanted to take his life. یک آقای افغانی خود ما بود که روانشناسی پیش می آمد، تقریبا بخلم برای 1 سال می آمدن. خانمش همیشه پایان می آوردش و ارزشش او مرد احساس خود نمیکرد، احساس میکرد که کدام چیز کم است یا ارزش نداره و اعتماد به نفسش صفر ساخته بود. خانمش برش میگفت که تو هیچ جای نرسیدی، مثل دیگر آواره امرای هر کس مثل هروونسا جان گفت که برابر میکردش به مردای دیگر. این تنها مانا نمیده ای که باید زنی یا خانم یا نه. وقتی که یک آدم ابیوز میکنه این پشت زن و مرد اولاد نمیگرده. I also wanted to touch on something else that you mentioned, which was child witnesses to DV or actual, I know that you talked about more children who are actual survivors of DV, but child witnesses to DV is also something incredibly important to be aware of. When a husband and a wife or two partners are in a domestic dispute, whether it's physical or whether it's emotional, children are severely damaged by this. And you may think that we're fighting downstairs and the children are upstairs and they don't hear anything. They carry this. They carry this into their dreams. Their dreams turn into nightmares. Their thoughts become very pessimistic. Um, they have long term PTSD from this, and they carry this into new relationships that they get into when they're adults. وقتی که افغان کلشان بازم ما هیچ وقت راجع به کل افغان ما شکر الحمدلله افغانای بسیار خوب داریم در هر گروه خوب هم است خراب هم است اما من راجع به ازمی افغان ها میگم که همین کارا رو انجام میدن یک خانم طور مثال و یک شوهر امروز یکی دیگه خود یک جنگ می داشته باشن فکر میکنن برو دیگه اولادا خورد هستن در بالا هستن نمیشنون شما که امروز یکی دیگه خود جنگ میکنین یکی دیگه خود داو میزنین گپای خراب میزنین یکی دیگه خودم میزنین یک طفل یک اشتک مثل طفل معصوم میباشه children are innocent وقتی که او چیزها را از طرف مادر و پدر خود بشنوه مغزش مثل اسفنج وارس او را جذب میکنه وقتی که در مکتب میره ای در فکرش هسته خدا مادر و بابیم جنگ کردن خدا مادرم خوب است جور است دینشا بابیم لط کرده بوده شب این چیزها را امروی خود همیشه هم روانی سرشان تاثیر میکنه هم در مکتب که میرن هم از نگاه سیکولوژی و هم وقتی که کلان میشن و آرسی میکنن در مناسبات های یا امروی خانم شوهر یا امروی در کار این بسیار سر اعصابشان یک ضربه منفی میزنن It's really important to highlight that these effects are long-term and they don't go away. Mariam at age 5, witnessing her father abusing her mother. When she's 15, Mariam's still going to be thinking about this. And the first taboo is, of course, discussing this. And, you know, it baffles me, but در کلتور ما در فرهنگ ما این گپ که شوهر اجازه نیست که کس راجع به ازی صحبت کنه کس نمیکنه دروغ میگه یا کس پرسان میکنه چرا چشمت کبوت است میگه افتادم از سر زینا یا مثلا یک دختر میآید در مکتب پشت دستش کبوت چی شده تا مریم دستت چی کرده افتادم راجع بهش صحبت کردن نمیتونیم در کلتور فرهنگ ما ایره باید تغییر بدیم ایره باید دیگه نکنیم we have to change this folks our community we have to break this habit and cycle of taboo of discussing these things when you have a black eye don't tell people you fell down the stairs when a child has a bruise don't tell that person to lie and say that they fell down the stairs or whatever, or they fell or they got hurt on their own. This cultural taboo is hindering and potentially harming somebody from saving their life. You know, having this important discussion can potentially save somebody's life. You know, before I go on to the next topic, I would like to you know, I was going to highlight some cases, but before I do that, I wanted to ask Hurunnessa John first if there is, have you ever had the experience at Adams at the masjid where somebody has come to you with this? Because statistics show that for the Muslim community, that the first place that Muslims go to for any problem, whether it's a financial problem, whether it's a marital problem, whether it's a death, whatever difficulty, people trust the masjid and people trust religious authority to be able to assist them. They'll go there first before they go to a DV agency or a mental health provider. So if you could share, enlighten us with some of your experiences, that would be great.
Absolutely. I guess the advantage here is that I work at a masjid. It's the second largest one here in the United States. I don't deal with the social service department. That's not where I head. But as an employee, as a full time employee, I do run into people who, if they see me in the masjid, will come and say, "Hey, I have this problem. Can you please help me?" I've had women coming and whispering to me and saying, "Hey, my husband's in the musalla, but he's abusive. I need to talk to someone. Can you just tell me where to go before he comes out?" And that like puts me in anxiety, and I can't even imagine what she's going through, because we have to do this really fast before the husband gets out from prayer, and he's in there praying, and then he goes home with her and beats her up. And so the masjid has always been a place of sanctuary for people, right? You go there for prayer, and you ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to help you and to guide you. And from the Islamic tradition, abuse is not allowed in any shape or form. That we know for a fact. So if anyone comes and says, "I have a right to beat my wife up," the right imam with the right knowledge will tell you, "No, you don't." That is not your place or your right. That's abuse. Um, and so a lot of times, now with COVID, we actually see an influx of cases of people calling about, you know because their abuse or the relationship is so strained that there's a high um, intake right now for divorce cases and all the masjids across the country. But because we're a center and we provide other services rather than just the prayer, we see all these other issues coming up. So when it comes to DV, our social worker, she deals with a lot of different aspects of resources that she hands out to them. She's very adamant about keeping confidentiality. She knows that this person does not want to be found, and then the husband can't know, or the wife doesn't know. You have to protect their privacy, and that's something that even Islamically it's amana, and we have to respect that. But the masjid has always been a safe haven for people. Could they feel safe because they can come and get an Islamic ruling on whether this abuse is justified or not, and then what are the resources. So one of the things that Imam Majid, who's our executive imam, does is he does a yearly training with Peaceful Families. It's another organization where they actually train imams throughout the country on DV. The whole 3-day course is about training imams to look for DV, how to have conversations with their congregants about DV, how to see the signs, how to find the resources within your county and state, an abusive physical relationship, how they can get help, how they can get away, or if any other kind of abuses there, what other help they can get in order to give them the resources that they need. So, alhamdulillah, for me, I work in a place where the imams are not brushing abuse under the rug and saying things like, "It's okay. He's just a man and he'll get over it. Just make dua and be patient." We don't say any of that. And that's because, alhamdulillah, our imams know what the rights of an abuse victim is. ما خودم در مسجد کار میکنم، در دپارتمنت outreach or interfaith زیر دستم است. ما social worker داریم. در کل امریکا ما تقریبا 25,000 مسلمان را سرویس میتیم. هر وقت نماز و social service education زایدگان نماز ما نمیتیم دیگه سرویس هم داریم، مگر یگانه چیزی که معلوم یگانه وقت یک زن میاد پیش من میگه که من مسلسل نماز خوانشته، مرا زود کس ببر که مرا کمک کرده بدون پیش از اینکه شوهرم از مصلی برای با خود ما می پرشر است، برای خود از خانم هم پرشر است که نال باید ما بدویم بریم در سوشال سرویس آفیس برای اینا کمک یافت کنیم و بدیم. و الحمدلله در مسجد ما یگانه خوب چیزی که من میبینم امامای ما بسیار در این شخص اینوستر هستن، ترینینگ میتن در امامای دیگه در دور امریکا از باره domestic violence برشان یاد میتن که domestic violence چی است، شریعت اسلام خودش چی میگه از باره از این، چه قسم اون نفر کمک کرده میتونن، چه قسم که از اون نفر گپ زده میتونن، چه قسم اون نفر resources county ولایت داشته باشه برشان چه قسم برسه و